Now, to hear about the progress that has actually made since the SDGs were incepted in 2015, please join me in welcoming Michael Green, CEO of the Social Progress Imperative, to set the stage for the rest of today's conversation. Michael?
Thank you, Lee, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Real pleasure to be here with you. I like to think of the SDGs as a promise that the leaders of the world have made to the citizens of the world. A really important promise that the lives of billions of people are going to get better over the 15 years of the SDG time span. Because I think it's really important that we hold our leaders accountable for delivering on this promise. And to deliver on that promise, we need to understand where we are, where we're going, and what we need to do to get to those SDGs. So that's what I want to do for you today. And it's not a very easy task, because the SDGs are, of course, spectacularly complicated. I would, in fact, expect nothing less from the United Nations. You know, how many goals? You know, something memorable, 3, or tried and tested like 7 or 10. No. Let's pick a prime number higher than 10 and have 17 goals. Bravo, bravo. And it's a hugely ambitious program, from ending poverty to sustainable fisheries and peace and justice and all that along the way. And it's also very hard because the data underpinning these SDGs is so absent. There are hundreds of indicators, but for many of them the data is missing, the data is incomplete, or the data is unreliable. So tracking progress is incredibly difficult. So that's why I'm going to use a tool today called the Social Progress Index. This is a comprehensive measure of a society's performance, ranging from the basic needs of humanity, food, water, shelter, safety, through to the building blocks of a better life, education, information, health, and a good quality environment, through to opportunity, rights, freedoms, inclusiveness, and advanced education. The Social Progress Index doesn't look like the SDGs, but it's fundamentally measuring the same underlying concepts. And critically, for the Social Progress Index, we have the data, 54 carefully selected indicators, so we can measure these concepts robustly. And because it's a composite index, we can add up all these data points into an aggregate score for how we're doing against the SDGs that we can track over time. So here we are. Let's look at the starting point for the SDGs in 2015. And what I've done is I've got to put all the countries of the world on a continuum from 0 to 100. 0 represents the worst possible score on every indicator, so sort of absolute social progress 0. And 100 represents the minimum standard required to achieve the SDGs. And what we see is that the world, there's quite a big dispersion. Norway is at front, very close to achieving that minimum standard for the SDGs. Central African Republic is a long way behind. So the challenge for the SDGs is essentially to sweep these dots across to the right, get every country to 100 by 2030. Can we do it? Well, with the Social Progress Index, we've got some time series. So we've got some sense on which direction countries are moving in on different aspects of the SDGs. And we can use this to make some projections. So let's look at some projections for some countries. Let's start off with some good news. And I'm very pleased to tell you that, yes, we do think Norway is going to achieve the minimum standard for the SDGs. Maybe not surprising, maybe not news, but I will always take a win. So well done, Norway. Let's look at the big economies of the world, the G7, and we see that Germany and Japan look likely to get there or thereabouts as well. But Canada, France, the UK and Italy are all going to fall short. The United States? A long way back. This is not good. But of course, these are not the countries that are really going to make or break the SDGs. They're big economies, but they're not the biggest populations. If we're thinking about quality of life, the SDGs will be made or broken in the biggest countries of the world. So here they are, ranging from China through to Ethiopia. These are all the countries in the world with a population of 100 million. I've left the USA and Japan out because we've looked at them already. So here we are, 11 emerging countries, all with a population of 100 million or more. Now, how far are they going to get in achieving the SDGs? Well, our number one performer, we think, is going to be Mexico. Mexico is going to get to a mid-80s kind of score. Actually quite close to where the US is forecast to get to, but quite a long way off the SDGs. Russia comes second, then Indonesia and China. Brazil comes next. I might have thought Brazil would have done a bit better. Then the Philippines, then India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nigeria and Ethiopia bringing up the rear. So this is concerning. We're seeing that these emerging markets, some of them are going to fall a long way short of the SDG targets. We can wrap this all up now for the world as a whole. So what we've done is we'll take all the countries of the world and then we'll sum it together, population weighted, of course. So China having a much more weight than Comoros, India more than Iceland. And what we see is here, 2015, at the start of the SDGs, we've got a score of about 69 on our progress toward the SDGs, trying to get to 100. In the few years since we've launched the SDGs through to 2018, I'm pleased to say we have made some progress, but only to 70.5. And if we extrapolate that out further, if we look into 2030, we're only going to get to 75 and a little bit. A long way short of the SDGs, which is a bit depressing. So let's have a look and see if we can find a bit what's going on and see if we can find some good news in here. So what I want to do now is drill in a bit into a couple of areas of the SDGs. The first of which is what we call nutrition and basic medical care. And this covers the very basic SDGs of SDG 2, no hunger, and the basic parts of SDG 3 on health, things like maternal and child mortality, infectious diseases, etc. And so on these SDGs, we see that the world actually started in a better place. There's been a lot of progress on these issues since the Millennium Development Goals. And so the world's starting at a higher place, 85. What we've also seen is that progress has been sustained over the last few years. And we're going to get to about 88 so far, 88.5 in the last few years, which is good progress. And so if we project that forward, we think the world can get to about 94.5 by 2030. Not all the way to the goals, but quite close. And what we also see when we look at this data is that some countries seem to be making remarkable progress. Bangladesh, for example, here it is in 2015, and here's our 2030 projection based on its current trend. Bangladesh could be achieving SDGs 2 and 3 if it stays on the current path. Perhaps even more remarkably, Ethiopia has come from a long way back, and if it can sustain this current rate of progress, it could get very close to achieving SDGs 2 and 3. And I think this is really important good news, because what it's telling us is this is possible. And what we need to do is spread this to other countries as well. Just to give you one example, here's the Philippines. The Philippines has started ahead of Bangladesh and Ethiopia on these SDGs, but has not made as quick progress. If we can accelerate progress in countries like the Philippines, then we are going to get very, very close to SDGs 2 and 3. This change is possible. So that's some good news around the very basic parts of the SDG agenda. There's something more worrying going on elsewhere, though. And I want to talk very briefly about what we call personal rights and inclusiveness. And this picks up aspects of the SDGs across SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 5 on gender equity, SDG 10 on reduced inequality, SDG 11 on inclusive cities, SDG 16 on peace and justice. Oh, remember them all, well done. And so on these measures, we see the world has started in a more difficult place. Personal rights score is not that high, because we know a whole bunch of countries are not prioritising rights in their development process. Inclusiveness is even worse, because we know that countries, rich and poor alike, are struggling with inclusion issues. So these are hard parts of the SDG agenda. We're starting from a low base. How are we getting on? Well, I'm sorry to say, we're actually going backwards. Because of what's been going on in China and India and Bangladesh, personal rights scores for the world have declined over the last 3 years. And what's been going on in places like Brazil and the United States, we're seeing inclusiveness scores declining. Which means that when we project forward on current trends, we're seeing a decline in these scores over the period of the SDGs, which is very, very worrying indeed. I want to finish with 3 thoughts about what we need to do to achieve the SDG agenda. The first one is the rich countries of the world have to wake up and realise that the SDGs are for them. It is frankly shameful that the richest countries with the most resources who are closest to the SDG targets are going to fall short. The SDGs apply to every country in the world. Every country should have a plan. Secondly, let's celebrate the fact that we are tantalizingly close to ending needless deaths from hunger and diseases like malaria and diarrhea. One more push is required to scale the successes to every country. This really is within our grasp and we should not fail. And the third thing is, we should compliment the creators of the SDGs, that they haven't just focused on the simple, basic problems. They have raised issues like rights and inclusion and put them on this agenda. Let's not give in to SDG a la carte and forget about these difficult parts of the agenda. Let's rise up to those challenges and find the solutions so we can deliver on the promise of the SDGs. Thank you very much.